Years ago, we had something called the separation of church and state, but let's get real. That fucking thing's over and done with now. So what do we do? Um, During oral arguments in the case of Shurtleff versus the city of Boston, Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch made a pointed reference to so-called separation of church and state. Um, Precisely this aside was meant to convey is unclear, but yet Gorsuch's dismissive comment laid bare what may have known for some time separationism as judicial and legislative doctrine. Basically, it's on life support, courtesy of the Christian right, and languishes in a theologically induced coma. Um, Many Americans who yearn for secular governance believes the believers and non-believers alike must confront this truth, accept it, and innovate accordingly. They need to do so expeditiously, given the Supreme Court's hard pro-religion turn, a turn that advantages um, the white conservative Christian majority at the expense of religious moderates, religious minorities, and non-believers. Basically, Gorsuch might have just been trolling at that time, but they claim he had a point. I but let's ask ourselves some hard questions about the separationism that we know and love. If we really had a wall of separation, the Supreme Court wouldn't appear receptive, as it does in Carson versus Macon, to affirming a religious right to government funds for schools that teach a biblical worldview. Like huge Christian crosses honoring fallen soldiers wouldn't sit on state property, like the American Legion versus the American Humanist Association. The recently re-established White House office of the faith-based and neighborhood partnerships would not exist. Symbolically, Christmas videos from the Trump White House wouldn't be permitted, nor would nor would President Joe Biden's shoutouts to St. Augustine on Inauguration Day. But we have no real separation in the United States. Luckily, separationism is just one type of secularism, and there are many others. The secularist movement in the United States, however defined, has an interest in learning about them and thinking outside of the box, as well as beyond the purported wall between religion and government. Now, secularism is a governing policy in which the state regulates the relationship between itself and its religious citizens, and also between religious and also between the religious citizens too. A secular state strives to balance freedom and order, and that must provide citizens who are beholden to every different worldview with as much freedom of religion, or since demographics are changing rapidly and in this regard, freedom from religion as possible. Now, simultaneously, it secures the civil calm required for them to enjoy those freedoms. Now, other nations teach us that these secular goals are achievable without separationism. India's beleaguered secular model accentuates I'm not sure if I'm going to say this right. Sarva Dharma Sama Bahaba, which means equal respect for all religions. Far from will, far from walling itself off, the government accommodates faith communities. India's constitution, for instance, even makes provisions for Muslim people to abide by their own law codes. Um, French secularism is altogether different. Now, I'm not sure if I'm saying this right either. Le Secte, as it is known, doesn't separate itself from religion. It actively controls it. French laws strike Americans as overly severe, like e.g. prohibiting public display of religious attire like burqas. Now, French citizens, though, overwhelmingly prefer a strong state grip on their religion, a preference conditioned by centuries of traumatic clashes with the Catholic Church. Now, France and India are constitutionally secular. The United States, as Christian conservative activists cheerfully note, is not. There is no constitutional guarantee of separation. Instead, there are a few dozen ambiguous words in our founding documents, 16 of them which read, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. In 1802, President Thomas Jefferson interpreted these sparse clauses to say that a wall of separation must exist between the church and state. That was a radical and unpopular opinion, especially with the Great Awakening on the horizon. Even another president, James Madison, who was the author of the First Amendment, did not share his colleagues' separationist zeal. Jefferson's opinion was mostly ignored until 1879, when it surfaced in a Latter-day Saint polygamy case, which was Reynolds versus United States, and then lay dormant for another 70 years. While separation is often assumed to be a foundational principle of American democracy, It was first operationalized as a judicial framework in the 1947 Emerson vs. Board of Education case. Now, soon thereafter, non-denominational prayer in public schools was deemed unconstitutional, like Engel vs. Vitale in 1962, as were the daily Bible readings Abington School District vs. Shemp in 1962 and Lemon vs. Kurtzman in 1971. They prohibited excessive government entanglement with religion. When John F. Kennedy exclaimed in 1960, "I believe in America," where the separation of church and state is absolute, he was trumpeting the new separation of status quo. In the 1970s, that status quo was in the crosshairs of a resurgent religious right. That triumphant onslaught aside, separationism's constitutional basis was always wobbly. In Wallace vs. Joffrey in 1985, the Chief Justice William Rehnquist pronounced it the wall metaphor to be based on bad history, which should be frankly and explicitly abandoned, as indeed it is soon, as indeed it is. 37 years later, Justice Gorsuch took a victory lap. Instead of demanding something the Constitution doesn't guarantee, like a wall of separation, secularists ought to focus on something it does: equal protection for all citizens, as guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. Now, borrowing from India, they might advocate for the equality of all believers and non-believers too. Now, equal rights secularism would highlight the legal inequalities that conservative Christian people, unlike the political activism, fosters. Now, thus, no county clerk would deny a marriage license to a same-sex couple in the name of a religious liberty. No single notion of when life begins could assume the status of that law. As dozens of religious organizations noted in their amicus curiae brief, like for the Dobbs vs. Jackson Women's Health Organization, there is a diversity of views both within and across religions concerning the nature and timing of the beginning of that life. A secularist should argue that to subject a Jewish woman in Texas to a conservative Catholic standard of fetal availability renders the former unequal to the latter. Now, borrowing from the French term, now if I'm saying that wrong again, laicite, American secularists might emphasize how privileging the rights of a few religious groups threaten order. When worshippers congregate during a pandemic, that's not free exercise, but reckless fucking endangerment. Now, when extremists storm the U.S. Capitol, that's not protected free speech, that's sedition. Even colonial-era constitutions stipulated what the First Amendment somehow never mentioned: your free exercise can't threaten public safety, but American secularists should demand equal protection literally. Now, enough with the walls. This is rigid and illiberal, an illiberal metaphor undershows the complex task that secularism performs in a multicultural society. Now, instead, secular legal and cultural activism should focus on the lawlessness and inequality that arise when the LGBTQ people, non-believers, religious minorities, and religious moderates are forced to live under one particular religious conception of God. So, if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King. And you can also hit the notification bell so that when a new video comes out, you'll be notified. Also, if you want to support my work even further, you could go to the About section on my YouTube channel, and I have a link to Patreon where you could donate further if you want to support the channel more. But I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll be back in another hour for another video.